Well, hello everyone. Welcome to the AggieBudget user group meeting for our April session. Today we're going to talk about little tips and tricks that we're hoping that even if you just go away with one thing from this meeting that you didn't know about that you can apply or that sparks your curiosity, we're hoping to do that today. So I've got Brian Martin Rojas with me here. He'll be co-presenting with me and we'll be switching off back and forth with each tip to try to keep it interesting. So with that, Brian, go ahead.
Yeah, good morning. So first we're going to be looking at the Axiom Assistant. When you first log in to AggieBudget, you'll see that this is the home screen that you're greeted with. And if you click the little caret here, you'll notice that it brings up all of your recent files that you've opened up. One of the useful things when you're working in and out of different plan files is that you can add a favorite. So we'll say this TAD03, let's say we're going to be working in it a lot over the next week. We'll just hit add to favorites, and then we'll be able to just quickly get to it every time we sign in. So that's just one of the useful tools we'll be going over today.
Mm-hmm. And just to note that the Axiom Assistant is only in the Windows client. It's not in the web client. So if you're searching around trying to find it, it's probably because you're in the web client. All right, next one. Very simple, but it changed my way of working in AggieBudget quite a lot once I thought through it, is just being able to open multiple plan files at the same time. Especially if the system is on the slower side that day, it can be helpful to just open them up and maybe run it in the background while you're working on something else and then come back, and that way you have multiple plan files open at the same time. So I'll just pick two for the sake of time, and you just hold down shift or control to pick the two or however many different ones you want. You press OK, and then that'll just load them all at once. So we already have 4 open here, but you'll see 2 more pop over here. And it's just a useful multitasking tool so that you're not frustrated with constantly opening a file, waiting for it, and then opening another file and waiting for that one. It can get tedious. So this is kind of a way to work around it and still keep efficient. All right, and there you go. See, there's the 2 plan files that we opened. So next one.
So one thing to understand when we're working in Axiom is that it's a lot like Excel. So to be able to see kind of how that affects everything, if you, let's say for example, we'll click into here, and we'll free up some real estate. Let's see, so one example is if you just click over here, up on formula bar, and then down on headings, you can see, okay, so this isn't a field that we would enter in normally, and so it just shows the 10,000. But if you click over to FY18-19 adjustments on recharts here, you can see that this number, the 10,000, is this cell right here minus all of these other adjustments here. And so it kind of gives you a good understanding of how relational the numbers that you're putting in are. And if you click around, you can see, okay, well, since I entered 10,000 in here, how does this affect what my FY18-19 commitment is? How is my fixed cost increment changed because of this? So it becomes a good tool to kind of understand how everything relates and what numbers affect what on your sheets.
Next, we're going to look at labor plan file, how we can change the personnel and other comp tabs, the view there, especially because there's a lot of data. Let me open this file here. There's a lot of data showing up here, and I don't think there are screens big enough to hold all that data in one view. And some of it, like the account, for instance, it's all the same in this plan file. So that data doesn't really matter to us, sub-account, project, all those things. So there's a couple things you can do to free up some real estate in the screen to be able to see a little bit better. The first simple thing that you can do, I think anywhere in AggieBudget with this ribbon, is right-click and press this minimize ribbon. If you don't need to be clicking in all of that, right, you can just make it smaller, and then this is the way to get it back. Just again, right click on the ribbon area and uncheck that. But to get rid of some of these columns to make it smaller and more readable, you would go to change view and go to additional detail. And then here you can select or unselect these different columns. So I'm going to deselect fund, org, project, subaccount, and monthly detail, because oftentimes it's the exact same amount in every month, so that doesn't really help me much. And so now it is still a decent amount of information, but it's less. So that's a way that you can break it down to be a little bit more digestible and usable view.
All right, and to kind of build off what Sarah was saying there, once you've limited the number of columns, how do you kind of get different cuts and chop and filter and see what you really want to see? So back in Axiom, we're on this sheet with the personnel. You'll click up to refresh here. And when you click on refresh, refresh is kind of a weird way to say it, but it refreshes the order of the variables, and you can sort it how you want, and you can then also filter it. And so let's say we want to see it in the order of employee name, and for our filter column, we just want to see title, and then for the title that we're interested in will be, let's say for this example, assistant 3. So we'll hit OK. It'll take a second to think, and then it'll show us all of our assistant 3 titles by their name. And so this is a good tool if you're trying to look at a specific category of employee, or however you're choosing to cut and look at your data.
Okay, this next one, I'm not going to go into AggieBudget because there wasn't an easy way to show a report without showing an actual unit's data and people. So I just tried to get a snapshot there of this other comps actuals report, which when you're going into budget for other comp, that's the section of the personnel sheet I'll show you here, where there's the different buckets of employees that maybe you don't want to plan for individually by person. For instance, you want to just group TAs as a class of people because you kind of know what your TA load will be for a quarter. So it's a quicker way to budget for a lot of people. And so this report could be useful. If you find it useful, please use it. That really just shows you prior year actuals for these different buckets. And the little plus sign here on the left, if you click on that, it opens up and lists all the people that make up the amount for each fiscal year. So you can see it and understand the data better. And then, especially if it's just everything is pretty much exactly like last year, no major changes, you could just plop those numbers right into the other comp tab for your budget and be done. So it's a useful way to just see prior actuals in a way that is familiar to your plan file. All right, and so next we're going to move into looking at calculation methods. I wanted to show these because when I realized how much you could do with it, there's a lot of options and a lot of ways to input detail only if you want to, and be able to budget for different numbers in different ways, because the system is pretty flexible in this way. So the first one is the default method that AggieBudget automatically assumes that this is the way you want to budget unless you change it otherwise. So this one is just an input adjustment where in the budget plan file, we'll go down to the uses section. You've got a starting point, which is calculated based on historical activity. So even if you didn't put anything in numbers yourself, you'd still have a budget because it's saying this is based on history, what we expect the budget to be for the upcoming year. So this way, you're just adjusting the starting point. So if, for instance, in your maintenance and repairs, you think everything will be pretty much the same as last year, but you have you know, a $500,000 expense that is new and unusual in the upcoming year. So you just want to adjust normal activity for that one thing that you know about. And so that adds, if you see normal activity is 1,700, that adds 500,000 to it to make it 501,700. And then you can change the spread method here. So there's 3 different options. There's even, 9/9, or historical. Even just splits it up throughout the months evenly. It's pretty logical. Historical just takes when the historical activity happened and spreads it across that way. So in this example, it looks like all the historical activity happened in October or January. So it automatically builds in that seasonality for you if you want it. Or there's the 9/9, which is for the academic year. I don't think this is a very practical selection, probably for maintenance repairs, because there's probably things that happen in the summer. But you know, if there's just some things that are especially tied to the academic year, that's a really useful way to get the monthly budget a little bit more accurate. So I'll just leave it over for 9/9, even though that's not realistic.
All right, the next calculation method we're going to look at is input monthly. And so this will be similar to input adjustment, historical, in that you'll be able to plan for specific seasonality when you're looking at something. So let's take, for example, let's come over here, and let's say that your unit has a high amount of recharge, let's say 100,000 recharge, and you know that it's going to happen in 2 months of summer. So we'll go up to add rows, change calc method again, and this time we'll go to input monthly. And so when we open this up, it makes each of the months an editable row. There we go. And so it'll automatically default it to just the normal even spread method. But if you know that, let's say in July and August, there's 50,000 of spread activity, or of recharge activity for each month, you'll just hit 50,000 and 50,000 again, and then you'll zero out all of these columns. And this will allow you to kind of prepare for that kind of seasonality that would come, so that as you're going through the year, you can say, okay, well, now that we've had these 2 spikes, now we can just know to expect there will be $0 of recharge activity for each month moving forward. And so this allows to kind of create an accurate budget for how you're planning to spend the money over the year.
The next calculation method is input total. So here we'll go back to this one, and there are 2 different ways to get to these calc method changes. So you can either, as we've been showing, add rows, change calc method, or you can just right-click on the cell and click calc methods and change calc method. So we're going to change this to input total. So if you notice, the blue box was here, and this warning sign, so it's asking, are you sure you want to replace the 1-row calc method input adjustment with the 1-row calc method input total from the calc method library? It's a good idea to pay attention to this warning for input total, at least, and all except the input detail one. You want to make sure that it's a 1-for-1 1-row calc method with the other calc method. If you see larger numbers here, you know, like one row and then, you know, 10, you could potentially be wiping out data. So you just want to make sure that it's replacing what you intended to replace. So this is just one calc method here, and I'm replacing it for another, so this seems correct, so I'll press yes. So that blue editable field that we had before, sorry, AggieBudget's thinking, now has shifted over to here. And so instead of adjusting your starting point, you can just say, you know what, I know that, for instance, I think the example I wanted to use was this meeting and registration. So let's do it again. Practice makes perfect. I wanted to say that no matter what the history was, say in this meetings registration category, we only have $1,000 to spend this year. So I don't care what the history was. I'm just going to put in this total that I know of. And, you know, maybe I don't know exactly when the expenses are going to hit. So I'm just going to say historical, because maybe they'll likely happen the way they did last year. So that's input total.
So next we're going to look at input detail. This is going to allow you to create subordinate lines below those budget lines. So we'll head over there, and so let's say, for example, for travel, we want to know not just what our unit's travel cost is going to be, but we want to be able to capture that information by employee. So we'll go up to add rows, to change calc method, input detail, and this is going to create subordinate rows under it. And kind of as Sarah was saying before, when you do input detail, you'll notice that this is going to be the only change calc method where it goes from replacing one row to 6 or 7. And so when you get to input detail, it's okay for that to happen. But if you notice that it's a 1 to not 1 for any of the other change calculations, you should probably look at what you're selecting before you hit yes. So we'll hit yes on that. And it opens up these boxes down here where we'll say enter detailed description. And so let's say we want to track mine, Brian Martin's travel, as well as Sarah Grinstead. And so when you want to add another row, you just double click on this orange add more detail, and it opens up the next row for you. And let's say we want to say that in August, I'm planning on spending $1,100 on travel, and in November, Sarah is going somewhere really far away, and it's going to be $2,500.
Nice. Where am I going?
Don't know. But this allows you to say, okay, well, we're budgeting this much for these employees in the unit, and this is the month that it will be spent. And so this allows for maybe some too much specificity for some units and as much specificity as you could potentially want within AggieBudget.
Mm-hmm. So all of these calc methods, you know, they're obviously optional, and it's really about how you want to budget and keep track of your information. All right, the next one we're going to do is how to add a budget group to an account block. And it may seem pretty obvious, but it wasn't intuitive to me, so I just wanted to share. The very important first step is to select an account block. Now, this is training data, so there is only one account block in this plan file, but most of you are going to have multiple account blocks. And if you just try to add add a budget group, it won't know which account block you're trying to refer to. So you have to select one first. And so you come up to this selected account block, see it's blank. So let's see, add rows. And if you can see, there's no insert a budget group here. And but once you go in, you double click on that, and there will be a list of all the accounts in your plan file here. You select the one that you want, and then it populates that field. Now when you come to add rows, the insert a budget group shows up, so you can actually do something. And then it pulls up all of the budget groups not used. I'm just going to pick utilities, and that should show up in the uses and the operating expenses. So you pick your input calc method. We'll just pick that one, and it's thinking. Budget is slow today. There it is. So the utilities is now in there, and you can budget for it.
All right, another tool that I use, and I think that's pretty important to be aware of, is the note and scratchpad features. When you're in budget plan files, it's called notes, and when you're in the labor plan file, it's called scratchpad. So an interesting thing that it allows you to do is when you're working inside of, let's say, your budget file here, and let's say, for example, we're still working within this input detail, On notes, we could have a list of each of our employees that we want to track for travel and the total amount that it was going to be. And then as we're working through our budget plan file, we can enter that number in and track that for us. And just the same way, if we were in the labor plan file and say we're under personnel, we could click over to Scratchpad and have a list of maybe each employee and their date of retirement for that year. And so then you can change when their the salary should stop for that, and that'll track in salary savings. So it's kind of a useful tool to have, to be able to have that kind of Scratchpad within Axiom. One really important thing to note, however, for both of these is that these sheets will not save. So it's very important that when you're working inside of it, you either leave it open, or if there are notes that you're going to need for the next time, to save them out to some other Excel file or Word file. Just something so that you don't end up losing important referential data for your plan file and your budget process.
Mm-hmm. And there is an option here if you do want to have side calculations that are attributed to this plan file, is you can have file attachments here, and you can upload an Excel file or whatever kind of file and have it here, so that if there are complex calculations that back up whatever it is that you're doing in your budget plan files, that there's a way to still attribute information, but it's not in the Scratchpad. That will disappear. All right, so this next tip is for kind of as you're working through your budgets, creating your budgets, how to have some check figures, gut checks as you're working through what you're trying to create for your budget. And so there's a couple reports. There's first is your summary tab, which is familiar to the account box that you have. It's just a sources and uses layout. But likely, you have a department and your department has multiple plan files. So just looking at this summary tab doesn't give you the full picture of your department's entire budget. So another place to go to look for that same summary information would be in the AggieBudget reports. So I'm going to show you back in the home screen here. Go to this little navigation pane, the reports library. There's a lot of good reports in here, but we're going to focus on two of them. The first one is the sources and uses. So you'd click on this. I've already pulled the file up for training data, but it would pop up to something like this, and you'd filter for what you want to see. And again, there's a lot of options here. But the report I pulled up is your final budget that you're currently working on, and excuse the dates, this is training data. Also excuse the numbers, they don't really make much sense, but and then the actuals for the prior year to compare it to. Especially if your budget is likely similar to last year, that'll be a good view to see if you're missing anything major, or there are more pieces to look at. So this is the summary sources and uses. I want to see budget groups. So I'm going to go to view options and show budget groups so we can see not just total operating expense, but all of the budget groups that make up operating expenses. But right away, looking at this budget versus last year, you can see, for instance, again, training data. In my budget that I'm creating right now, I have not budgeted for any base budget at all, gen funds. But last year we had almost $1 million. So right there, I see, maybe I should go back and look at where this base budget was and see if I'm going to be getting that again this year. And then, coming down here, again, an unlikely situation, but where you have no academic salaries last year, and you're budgeting for, 800,000 of academic salaries in this budget year. Are you sure that's really what you mean? Maybe you do have a bunch of faculty you just hired. You know, and then looking at operating expenses, it looks like they're all exactly the same. So maybe you did a great job there. So this is just a good way to kind of look at a high level, you know, maybe by your department, by your college, however you see it, and see where more work is needed. So another report that I wanted to show you guys was the 12-month projection report. It's kind of the same look, but just a different lens in the data. So this 12-month projection report, again, it's the same sources and uses layout with all of your uses laid out there. But what this shows you is you can mash up the actuals year to date for the current year with the remaining months that have yet to happen. You can put in a projection here using just prior actuals. So especially if you've got seasonality throughout the year, this will really help you to see how much left in your budget there is and how you'll end up for the year, as well as it gives you a comparison to prior year. So both of these tools are kind of high-level gut checks that you can use as you're going through to make sure that the budget that you're creating at a granular level makes sense from a higher level perspective as well. And so with that, we thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope to see you next time. Thank you.